This podcast is not safe for work and will feature movie spoilers. It will feature scenes described of a graphic nature. It will contain language which most listeners may find offensive. Welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. Hi everyone and welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. I'm your host Duncan. Welcome to the show. On this episode we're continuing a look at the Italian collection from 88 films. We've arrived at disc number 84. This little softcore outing called The Pleasure, directed by Joe D'Amato from 1985. We are picking back up on this. I've got a couple of episodes recorded in the bank for the Italian collection just to bring us up to speed. I think I'm up to date with all the purchases for this as well now. Just picked up Shango today actually, so kind of prompted me to get a few of these recorded in just to put out. So yeah, next couple of weeks expect a few more Italian collections. Also, if you're interested in the slasher classics, the archive will be going up during May of the episodes which aren't currently available on YouTube, and then we'll be recording the next few of those as well, because once again I'm all caught up with the release slate there. So, without any further ado, we're going to spend a bit of time chatting about The Pleasure, and I'll tell you right now, before we jump into anything too deep, probably, in fact there's so many sexually orientated pun and innuendos we could do on this episode, as we're saying that the cover case artwork here, Graham Humphreys, who is a good friend of the show, former guest, and also just general badass dude, has knocked it out of the park. This is a wild cover with almost just a hint, a side nipple, just almost a hint. It's there, but so far out of reach. We're going to be discussing this movie in a little bit more detail right after this. So here we are with another entry in the 88 Films Italian collection, and we've got The Pleasure from 1985. A film that feels very different from the more overtly genre-driven titles we usually associate with, one, Italian cinema from the 70s and early 80s, but also two, from Joe D'Amato. Well, to an extent. If you only know Joe D'Amato from his horror output, then you may be surprised. If you know Joe D'Amato's oeuvre of cinema, maybe slightly less surprising, because we are talking about Italian exploitation cinema, and the name D'Amato carries a lot of weight. He was, of course, one of the most prolific and most controversial filmmakers to come out of the era. He'd worked across horror, exploitation, and erotica, which is the one that most people seem to forget that he was involved with, often blending the boundaries between them. Films like Anthropophagus and Absurd really cemented his reputation in the horror space for sure, especially for audiences looking for something extreme and transgressive, and also on the video nasties list. By the mid-80s though, D'Amato, like a number of Italian directors, had begun shifting more heavily into softcore erotic cinema, and The Pleasure sits firmly in that phase of his career. The film stars Gabriella Tinti, another familiar face in Italian genre films, particularly from the 70s. Here, he plays an aristocrat consumed by grief and obsession, fixated on audio recordings left behind by his deceased lover. It's a premise that leans much more into the kind of psychological and emotional territory than the traditional narrative momentum, and there's a kind of melancholic stillness to the character that Tinti plays with a kind of subdued, almost detached intensity. The central dynamic of the film, where the daughter of the deceased lover begins to insert herself, or other way around depending on which way you look at it, puns all intended, into his life and ultimately attempts to seduce him, is clearly designed to create tension, but not in the way you might expect from your bog standard thriller. Instead, the film unfolds in a kind of slow, almost dreamlike way, focusing more on mood and atmosphere than plot progression. And that's really the defining characteristic of The Pleasure. It's visually elegant and decadent and aesthetically polished, but dramatically it really is quite thin. Kind of think of the depth of a teaspoonful of water, and you're kind of on that territory here. D'Amato, to his credit, knows how to frame a scene, and the film has kind of the high-end, almost aristocratic looking of it, kind of fitting given its subject matter, the interiors, the lighting, the pacing of the camera itself, all contributes to the sense of quite kind of almost quiet decadence. There's a clear emphasis on style, sensuality, which makes sense given the genre he's working in here, one that by this point he's kind of accustomed to. But the trade-off is that narrative never really grips you. It kind of drifts, scenes linger, interactions repeat similar emotional beats, and the film seems more interested in maintaining a tone than telling a compelling story. It becomes less about what's happening and more about how it feels, and whether that works for you will depend on your tolerance for slow atmospheric cinema. And ladies and gents, you know this guy loves himself some slow atmospheric cinema. Looking at the film in its wider context though, it's hard not to see it as part of a broader shift that was happening in Italian cinema during the 80s. We've already covered some of these titles in the 88 Films Italian collection thus far. But just to recap, by the late 70s, the genres that had defined Italian filmmaking on the international scales, the giallo, the spaghetti westerns, and even the more extreme end of exploitation horror, we're looking at things like Cannibal Holocaust, were starting to lose their commercial edge. Audiences were changing, and the competition from Hollywood was becoming more intense. In that time period, you'd had blockbusters like, in fact, you'd had the blockbuster Jaws, and now we're moving into Star Wars territory, and it kind of fundamentally changed the expectations about spectacle and production value, and Italian studios often couldn't compete or fund at that scale. At the same time, home video was becoming an interesting predicament shaping the market. There was a growing demand for content, but not necessarily on the same budgets or theatrical ambitions. So for many Italian filmmakers, moving into erotic cinema, particularly softcore, was a practical decision. These films are cheaper to produce, easier to distribute, and had a built-in audience. So when you look at D'Amato's move into that space, it does feel like it's not an outlier. It kind of feels like a reflection of the industry adapting to kind of new economic realities. And directors who had been once at the forefront of horror and exploitation weren't exactly abandoning those genres. I mean, softcore is still a form of exploitation, but they were kind of moving because the market had moved. And in that sense, The Pleasure becomes more than just a standalone film. It's a snapshot of Italian cinema in its transition, much like some of the earlier films we talked about in the 70s. That said, understanding the context doesn't necessarily make the film more engaging on its own terms, because like I said before, even though The Pleasure is undeniably well shot, and while the performances, especially from Gabriele Tinti, are solid, it does struggle with its pacing and narrative engagement. It's a slow burn, but slow burns need a payoff, and, you know, this movie, it's lacking that payoff. It's lacking the money shot, if we're going to go vulgar terms again, why not? The emotional and psychological themes are here for sure, but they never fully feel explored in a way that is actually satisfying. Instead, the film leans heavily on its atmosphere and sensuality, which gives it a certain artistic quality, but also makes it feel a bit distant and at times a bit flat. You're observing it more than being pulled into it. So overall, The Pleasure feels like a beautifully constructed and ultimately hollow experience. It's a film that showcases D'Amato's ability to create mood and visual elegance, which, to be honest, some people overlook, but you shouldn't. The guy could direct. And whilst also highlighting these limitations within the story, maybe not necessarily his fault, you can only film what's on the page, it really doesn't have enough substance to sustain its runtime. And maybe that's part of a broader story for maybe a different conversation down the line, because both for the film and Italian cinema at this time, that shift away from bold, genre-defining work, which happened in the previous decade and particularly into the start 80s, has moved into something quieter, more niche, and ultimately less impactful on the global stage. So yeah, The Pleasure. First time watch, obviously, as you gathered. The interesting things for me here are always around Joe D'Amato. He's a name who pops up whether it's producing cinema or directing cinema or going by pseudonyms to help films be made. It's a very, very interesting guy. And yes, it is very easy to look at movies like Anthropophagus or Absurd, which are both great movies. I mean, I would argue Absurd is a film that has only got better with time and better prints from distributors. But I think people forget that the dude did a lot of cinema and kind of erotica that his name gets attached to, whether it's some of the Black Emanuelle movies or specifically in movies like The Pleasure. You kind of still see that there's if anything, his kind of filmic directorial sense is sharper by the time we get to The Pleasure. It's one of his, I would say, more kind of lavish looking productions overall, but that comes at an expense. Whereas Argento can get away with sometimes being a bit thin on story, a bit thin on dialogue, a bit thin on pushing actors into performances to give way for, incredible cinematography and, luscious, gory kills, which you can hang your hat on. The Pleasure has all the kind of pomp and circumstance of something quite regal in the way it's presented, but ultimately, as I mentioned in the kind of upfront, it's a movie that kind of toys with a few ideas that seem really interesting that never really go anywhere, and are touched upon, another pun there, and the most kind of first layer superficial extent. There really isn't much depth to this movie at all. In terms of the special features, well, can I just say, 8 films on a run at the moment. The last kind of 2 or 3 that I've reviewed, the special features have been packed, and there's no exception here. Like I mentioned before, if you got the old limited edition one with a slipcase, then you're getting some primo quality Graham Humphreys art here. Other things that are on here, you've got the limited edition booklet notes in this one here. So it comes with a little booklet, which I quite enjoy when they do that. You're also getting some brand new translated subtitles. I tend to watch all these movies with subtitles. I'm getting to that age now where like everything I watch has subtitles on it. So when I pick up a title, any Blu-ray, and there isn't subtitles, I do groan, because it means that my hearing is going to be challenged. You have Clyde on Joe D'Amato, an interview with Claudio Fragoso. The Pleasure of It All, an interview with Franco Grattaroli. A film mirage of Sex and Violence, which is a video essay by Mike Foster. That was actually a ton of fun, so highly recommend that. Almost worth the price of admission here. Once again, I got this as part of... there's a chain of stores owned by HMV in the UK called FOP. I like to throw my money at FOP. But they're always got a deal on of some descriptions. I ended up getting this one for like $7.99, so it was a good purchase because I got 2 for £15. There's Budget Erotica, a visual essay by Pier Maria Bocci, and then you've got the usual things, the theatrical trailer, etc. The reversible sleeve, because if you're like me, you love the artwork there, but you know that the 8 films earlier stuff didn't have all these bespoke artworks and had the uniform numbers along the side, which you can't see with these ones, which does drive me a little bit crazy. Visually stunning movie. Joe D'Amato maybe at his peak, kind of directing the visuals, but in terms of story and actual enjoyment here, I'm not going to use titillation. Softcore doesn't really do it for me, if I'm being honest. There may have been a time where it would have, but those days are long since gone. I can marvel at the score, I can marvel at the cinematography, but I need something that I can say to someone rather than have them roll their eyes when I say, oh, it's a really beautiful movie. That's like these days that just doesn't cut the mustard. In terms of scores for this one, I'm going to probably come in. I'm going to give it a kind of very low 3. So it's a generous 3 I'm giving it here. It's probably more realistically a 2.5, but it is Joe D'Amato and it does look really nice. So I'll maybe mark up a little bit there. But this is one of these ones in the collection where, for completists only, I don't think this is one you should be rushing out to buy. But I think if you do, there will be bits in it that will kind of spark an interest. Or, yeah, not the bits with the naked people, obviously. But, I mean, just in terms of the way the film's put together. It's a curious thing to think of what the Joe D'Amato of 1985 would have been like working on a movie even 5 years before this. in your time periods of your absurds and your anthropopacuses. But even at the kind of... Even through the Black Emmanuel movies, that could be really interesting to see how those movies might have brushed up a little bit better, or what decisions he could have made there. It wasn't as if he was squeamish or was moving away from it. It's just, like we mentioned, the times were a changing. So yeah, 3 out of 5 for The Pleasure. Let's close out the show and do it right after this. And you've been listening to Checking Out and All That Jazz, the podcast Under the Stairs, where we have just covered disc number 84 in the Italian collection from 88 Films. We will be returning within a week to do disc number 85, which was the other one that I got in that 2 for 15 deal. You can see the little sticker on it still to be open. But a movie I have actually seen before, and believe it or not, a movie that we have actually reviewed on this channel before. I think I reviewed it with Dave Parker. And that's a couple of years ago, because it exists in fact, if you bear with me, nothing like actually standing up and moving around when you're trying to chat to people. It exists on this set here, from... Who put out this one? This was Severin. So this is the Lindsay Baker, the complete Giallo set, which has, of course, Orgasmo, which, I mean... makes it sound like it should be in line with the kind of softcore outputting of The Pleasure, but it really isn't. This movie is actually a ton of fun. So, more giallo-y goodness from the master of the genre, Umberto Lenzi. The cinematic gem follows a wealthy widow who moves into a luxurious home in Italy, only to find herself the target of a mysterious but handsome stranger and his equally stunning step-sibling. So cue questionable debauchery, dangerous drugs, and very saucy sex. Starring Hollywood hottie Carol Barker, because she's in all these movies that she made with Mr. Lenzi, of which we've covered a few in the collection, and I think there may be some more from that list still to come out. I can't remember if A Quiet Place to Kill has been released yet, but So Sweet, So Perverse and Knife of Ice, I am sure, are movies we've covered as part of the collection. But this psychological thriller takes the genre into truly dark, surreal places while delivering a pitch-perfect, claustrophobic atmosphere. Sold, and like I said before, I actually already have seen this movie a few times and like it quite a bit. So we are going to be covering this one. I can already tell that's Graham Humphrey's artwork on that. So good choice, 88 Films. Well done. And it's absolutely stunning. So yeah, that's what we'll be covering on the next one. And then, yeah, I've got another one. I've got the next one after that banked as well. So over the next 2 bit weeks, you'll be getting them. As I mentioned before, this month coming, so May, we will be uploading the entire back catalogue of the Slasher Classics, which I think run numbers 1 through maybe 49 or 50. I think I'd done before we moved over to YouTube, so all those will be going up, and then when they're there, you'll be getting the next installments beyond the last one we did, which I think was Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that as well. Loads of content coming your way. Also this week, the long-awaited review of The Mortuary Assistant, which I watched, 2 weeks ago to record a review, and then never got around to it, so that'll be dropping. And also Cold Storage, which is a movie I got a screener for, and we're hoping, fingers crossed, we can get the director on to chat. That conversation's happening in the background at the moment. So that's a movie with Liam Neeson and Joe Keery. So kind of horror comedy. Kind of think Evolution, but maybe not as overtly a dark comedy as Evolution. So yeah, we'll be talking about that as well. All that and more coming up. And yeah, I think we've already announced it informally, but I can announce it definitely now. It's something huge planned for over the summer on Podcast Under the Stairs, when we look at all the indicator releases for Jean Rollin, the French auteur, of which I think his 2 recent ones have just come in. So I got them through this week. So I think that puts them up to about 13. So we're running a kind of 13 movie run of reviews, broken into probably groups of 2 or 3 over summer. Think of those as being more beneficial if you check them out in a medium where you can see the video aspect, because they're going to be a lot more video essay based than necessarily just your standard reviews. You can watch them without any pictures, that's fine. It's just some of the visuals may line up with what I'm saying. Let's put it that way. So yeah, a lot of talking here. It's because I haven't put anything in a couple of weeks. So let's bring this in. Thank you very much for checking out this episode. Make sure if you're checking us out YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of those places, you are subscribed. So you get all the new episodes when they drop. You have access to the 1,400 episodes plus of podcasts under the stairs and many more to go. So until then, wherever you are, whatever the time zone is and whatever you're up to in this big bad world of ours, please take care of yourselves out there. This is Duncan McLeish broadcasting live from under the stairs, and I am signing off. Bye everyone.